Hello, friends. Teresa Davis here. It's Monday night at 9:48 p.m. I've never waited this long to record a podcast before the morning that it comes out. I'm tired. Just like you, I lived through Mother's Day yesterday. I want you to know that I thought about each and every one of you yesterday. I prayed for you. I prayed for strength. I prayed for hope. I prayed for endurance. I prayed for distractions. I prayed for you to feel the presence of the Holy Spirit. And we did it. We made it through another Mother's Day. And I just want you to know how proud I am of you, because I know how draining it is to be what you have to be on a day that brings pain and discomfort. So here I am. I decided to take the whole weekend off, which is something that I never do, but I chose to do that this weekend, and I'm so glad that I did. I'm answering a question on the podcast today that was submitted by a listener. I love to hear from you and what's on your mind, because it helps me help you. The subject the listener wants to hear about has repeatedly come up over and over in the last few months. That means it's on your mind too. Have you ever heard that saying that if one person says it, there's probably 10 more that feel the same way? Well, stay tuned, because I'm going to give you the top 4 takeaways from today's episode. We are going to learn some things today that you may have never been exposed to, and it just might change your life. Are you lost in the chaos of grief, struggling to find your way in the darkness? Are you asking yourself, will I ever be able to enjoy life again? Are you wondering where God is right now? Welcome to the Grief Mentor Show. This podcast is a safe place for you. It will shine a light into the shadows, helping you discover that joy and pain can coexist, that you still have purpose, and there is a path to peace. Hello, friend. I'm Teresa Davis. I, too, was lost in the chaos of grief the day my son died. Just like you, I longed for peace in this unfamiliar world. I longed for the weight crushing my chest to be lifted so I could breathe. I clung tightly to the anchor, and it was there that I discovered the tools I needed to navigate life after loss. And I'm ready to help you do the same. If you're ready, I'm holding my hand out to you, friend. Let me show you the way, one step at a time. Friends, this is your reminder that the live Q&A support group for the Grief Mentor Insiders is this Thursday, May 16th. It's a time for bereaved parents only to meet and support one another. And whether you know it or not, if your child died, you need community support. We were never meant to bear the loss of our child alone, regardless of the way your child left this earth. This is a judgment-free zone. How do you attend? I'm so glad you asked. Become a Grief Mentor Insider at thegriefmentor.com. And once you are an insider, follow the directions in the newsletter to join. Once you join the newsletter, I'll get a notification and I'll send you out the newsletter. Inside is a video. It's about halfway down the newsletter, and it'll have all the instructions that you need to be able to attend. If you're already an insider, just use the link that you used from last month. It's the same one. If you have a question, though, make sure you submit it on the form, on the Google form that's inside the newsletter. There's a link there. If you want to submit a question, make sure you do it by 5 p.m. tonight. Feeling like you need to go a little deeper into your personal story with the Grief Mentor? I'm here. Go to my website at thegriefmentor.com or the link in the show notes to book a time for just you and I to work through your story of loss and focus on what you need the most right now in your grief journey. I received a message from a listener this past week after they listened to the episode When Home Doesn't Feel Like Home Anymore, Mother's Day Grief. Did you listen to that before Mother's Day? I sure hope you did, because it was packed with tips on how to manage tough days when all you want to do is run and isolate and maybe even pray to die like Elijah. Maybe you reached a place like he did where you said, I've had enough, Lord. I know I sure did. Here's the thing, friend. Every day is tough when you're learning to live in this world without your child. So if you haven't had a chance to listen before Sunday, listen to it sometime this week, because the principles of survival on hard days is applicable for all the hard days, not just days like Mother's Day. The question asked of me this week is this, quote, why do couples get on edge with each other after a child dies? Many divorce. Please do an episode on this, end quote. I didn't get permission to use their name, so they will remain anonymous, but you know who you are. I hear from you often, and this is such a great question. Thank you for asking it. There's some crazy statistics out there that somewhere between 80 to 90% of marriages end in divorce after the death of their child. Now, to address this statistic, this issue of divorce, Compassionate Friends, which is a self-help organization for bereaved parents, did a survey with about 15,000 parents who had lost a child. Now, I tried to find the actual survey results itself, but I came up short because the link said that it had been moved or no longer available. However, I did find an appendix labeled Bereavement Experiences After the Death of a Child on the National Institute of Health website if you want to go look that up for your own reference. That's NIH. And they address this survey completed by Compassionate Friends. The survey results reported that 72% of parents who were married at the time of their child's death are still married to the same person. Now, remember, the number of people they surveyed was around 15,000 parents. So 72% of those parents were married at the time of the death of their child, and they were still married at the time of the survey. Now, I really wanted to find the survey so that I could get a little more detail, but unfortunately, it's unavailable. But the conclusion of the survey was that the divorce rate among bereaved parents was substantially lower than is often cited. I found another source in an abstract written on death studies called A Child's Death and Divorce: Dispelling the Myth. Evidence was found to indicate that a child's death can strain marital relationships, which may lead to separation and/or divorce in some cases. However, there is no conclusive evidence that bereaved parents are likely to divorce as a result of a child's death. In fact, this study found that the majority of marital relationships survive the strain brought on by a child's death and may even be strengthened in the long run. Now, with all of that said, how do you and your spouse not end up a statistic after the death of your child? And that is where we are going to spend our time today. 3 of the most common problems that can contribute to divorce after the death of a child is caused by, I'm going to read off these 4 findings. Number 1 is failing mental health. Number 2 is problems due to changes in identity. Number 3 is increased difficulty of emotional communication. And number 4 is decreased sexual intimacy. Now, this data came from an international journal on personal relationships called Interpersona. So what do you do with this information, and how does your marriage keep from being a statistic? What I'm going to teach you today is how to recognize different grieving styles within your marriage. Listen closely. Maybe even take some notes so that you can better understand your own personal grieving style and that of your spouse. Now, why is this important for you? Because if you can understand the why behind your spouse's actions, then it could soften your response to them. How many times, friend, have you heard or been told that there is no right or wrong way to grieve? Probably many times. Grieving is a judgment-free zone, right? Except when you're living with someone and both of you are going through the worst thing that has ever happened to you. It's nearly impossible to stay in that judgment-free zone because how your spouse responds to their grief affects you. That's the bottom line. It's difficult not to have expectations of one another in regards to how your, quote, I'm using air quotes, how your spouse should be grieving. Okay, let me say that again. It's difficult not to have expectations of one another in regards to how your spouse should be grieving. The way your spouse grieves or not grieves may make you uncomfortable, and that sets the stage for tension in your marriage. So I'm going to break down these grieving styles that I mentioned. The source of what I'm about to teach you came from research conducted by a man named Ken Doka, and he is a PhD. He, along with another person named Terry Martin, found 3 types of predominant grieving styles. And I'm going to share his work with you today. Okay, there's 3 grieving styles. Number 1, instrumental. Number 2, intuitive. Number 3, dissonant. And we're going to break these down one by one. Listen closely. An instrumental griever are those that are doers. They're very task-oriented. They use task or work for distraction. They tend to experience their grief physically rather than emotionally. They may need to take care of something or someone. They may be reluctant to talk about their feelings. They tend to focus on the future rather than the past. For example, our child died, but that's in the past. Now let's focus on the future. They're analyzers and action-oriented problem solvers. These type of grievers tend to have delayed grief because in all of their doing and their task, they push their grief deeper and deeper. These type of grievers tend to be men. Number 2, intuitive grievers. They are comfortable expressing their grief and they allow themselves to show strong emotions and tears. They're sensitive to their own grief and to the grief of others. They yearn for comfort. They become physically exhausted from their grief. They may become anxious. They may have difficulty concentrating on task. These types of grievers usually are women. Number 3, dissonant. These type of grievers tend to have an internal conflict about their grief because how they feel inside, they won't allow themselves to show on the outside. Okay, they are protectors of their image. These type of grievers tend to be stuffers because they want to protect their image. For example, men are supposed to be strong and not cry or show emotion. They may feel a strong sense about their grief, but they cannot express it because they are supposed to be strong and protect those that they love, the people that mean something to them. And in their minds, they have decided that means that they're not allowed to show their grief. And this creates a lack of harmony and significant internal conflict, and it can manifest itself in many different ways. These type of grievers have the potential to manage grief in unhealthy ways. Okay? Another trait of a dissonant griever is that they may condemn themselves or feel guilty for not feeling whatever they think is expected of them to feel. Then we have the blended griever. This can manifest any combination of these 3 that I just went through with you. Learning your personal grieving style as well as your spouse's grieving style will go a long way in understanding each other and set the stage for good communication. Now, I shared a lot of information with you today, so you may have to listen to this podcast more than once to be able to get the whole gist of it. But the main takeaways I want for you is this. Number 1, it is a myth that 80 to 90% of marriages end in divorce after child loss. Number 2, understanding your spouse's grieving style goes a long way in helping you understand the why behind his or her actions. And number 3, having expectations of how your spouse, quote, should grieve is a sure way to put stress not only on your marriage, but on the person who is trying to survive the same thing you are in their own way. And number 4, please communicate. And if you can't do that on your own as a couple, seek out a good grief marriage counselor because your marriage is worth it. And friend, above all else, pray for each other and with each other. Right now, it may feel impossible that your marriage is going to survive. What's the biggest mistake we make in our grief journey? I've mentioned this to you several times, and it's worth mentioning it again and again because I want it to become second nature to you. I want this to pop up into your mind every time you have a negative thought, or you feel overwhelmed, or you just feel like you're not going to make it. The biggest mistake we make in our grief journey is putting God in our box of possibilities. Friend, memorize this verse on the way to running to the rock of safety. God can do immeasurably more than anything that we can ask or imagine according to his power that is work within us. Ephesians 3:20. And just in case you're wondering what the rock of safety is, from the ends of the earth, I cry to you for help when my heart is overwhelmed. Lead me, Lord, to the towering rock of safety. Psalm 61:2. It is possible to survive the death of your child with hope, with purpose, and save your marriage too. If you need help in understanding grieving styles and what that means for you in your marriage, or how to not take on the grief of your spouse and to be able to communicate your needs, book a call with me at the griefmentor.com Work With Me page, and let's do this together. And friend, that's all I have for you today. So until next time, take care. Did today's episode touch your heart? If it did, would you take a moment and leave a review on Apple Podcast? I read every single one. Scroll all the way down past all of the episodes till you come to a place where you can leave 5 stars. And would you go a step further and write a written review? It would mean the world to me if you did. Would you mind to share today's episode with somebody that you know that needs a ray of light in their grief journey? I would so appreciate it if you did. From my heart to yours.